Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. It feels strange even now to think about her. There are moments when her name still dances in my mind like the first time I heard it, soft, unassuming, but with an unmistakable warmth that made everything feel right. Her laugh was light, like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. I never could have imagined that one day it would be the last sound I would hear from her, or at least the last sound I would hold on to in my memory. We met on a late summer evening, somewhere between the rush of youth and the uncertainty of the future. I remember the way she looked when we first locked eyes, a quiet confidence, but also this openness, like she was waiting for something, maybe someone. There was a quiet beauty in her presence, something that drew me in, made me want to know everything about her. It's funny how you can meet someone and, in an instant, feel like you've known them forever. That's how it was with her. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were supposed to meet, like fate had woven us together in a way that only the universe could understand. Her name was Clara. She had a way of speaking, slow and deliberate, like each word mattered, and the way she looked at the world intense, yet gentle, was something I admired from the start. We spent days talking, wandering through the city, visiting little cafes and parks, where our conversations stretched into the night, and I found myself falling bit by bit into the warmth of her heart. We were inseparable. We didn't need much, just each other. I started planning trips, making memories with her as if time itself were on our side. But sometimes I think we don't realize how fragile everything is until it starts slipping through our fingers. The summer passed too quickly, and before I knew it, I was packing for a trip. I was heading out on a long journey, and Clara was staying behind, tied up with her own commitments. We both knew what the distance would mean. I hated the thought of being away from her, but I convinced myself that it was just temporary. We had something real, something that couldn't be broken by miles. Clara and I promised each other that we'd stay in touch. Long letters, phone calls, and late-night texts. Those were the things that kept us connected while I was away. I'd tell her about the places I visited, the people I met, the small things I noticed that reminded me of her. And she'd tell me about her days, about the things that kept her busy, but always with that sense of longing to see me again. It felt good, to know that no matter the distance, we would be waiting for each other. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but there was a shift. I think it began with the way Clara started speaking about her life without me. She was growing, changing. I noticed how her words were filled with new excitement, about her work, about her friends, and there was this new spark in her voice that wasn't there before. I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself it was just the natural flow of life, that things were just evolving, and it didn't mean anything. Then came the first crack. She told me about him. At first, I didn't understand. She spoke of a man she'd met through a mutual friend, someone she had been spending time with, someone who seemed to have an understanding of her that even I didn't have. I remember the way her voice faltered when she said his name. Luke. It felt like a dagger in my chest, but I couldn't say anything. I didn't want to sound insecure or possessive, but the truth was that hearing his name made me feel something I couldn't shake. I tried to be supportive, to understand. She was always so honest with me, and I thought maybe it was just a friendship. But the more she talked about him, the more I realized something was shifting. It wasn't just friendship. She was changing, and somewhere along the way, I was no longer the person she was waiting for. One night, she told me about a trip they took together. It was meant to be just a short getaway, but I could hear in her voice that it had been more than that. When she talked about it, there was a lightness in her words that I hadn't heard in a long time. She spoke of the way they laughed together, how they talked until sunrise, and how he understood her in ways I never had. And that's when it hit me I was losing her. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself that this was just part of life. People grow, they change, and maybe I was just part of her past now, a chapter that had already been written. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the truth was undeniable. Clara wasn't the same. She wasn't the person who needed me anymore. I came back from my travels hoping things would settle, that we could pick up where we left off. But the distance between us had grown so much more than just physical. When I saw her again, there was a subtle difference in the way she looked at me. It wasn't the same warmth, the same intensity. Instead, there was a softness, like she was gently letting go. And then she told me, "I think I'm in love with him." It wasn't anger that I felt. It was more like a hollow emptiness. The kind of feeling you get when something you thought was unbreakable has crumbled away. My heart sank, but I nodded, trying to hold on to my composure. I didn't want to cry in front of her, didn't want to make this harder than it already was. But it felt like I was drowning in the silence between us in the weight of her words. She apologized, of course, and said she hadn't meant for it to happen. But I could see it in her eyes. There was no going back. She had already made her decision. Luke had become the person she was waiting for. And I was just the memory of someone she used to love. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened between us. I don't know if there was ever a chance for me to keep her, or if I was always meant to lose her. But I can't hate her for it. I can't hate her for finding someone else, for discovering a love that spoke to her in ways I never could. Sometimes love just changes, and no matter how much you want to hold on, it slips away. Now I find myself looking back at those days with a kind of bittersweet nostalgia. I remember the warmth of her touch, the way her hand fit perfectly in mine. I remember the promises we made, the dreams we shared. But most of all, I remember the love we had before it faded, before it was lost to time. And maybe that's all we can hope for in the end, to love deeply, even if it's for just a little while, and to carry that love with us as we move forward in life. Even if the love fades, it still shapes us. And in that way, maybe I'll always be grateful for her. I was never the kind of guy to think much of myself. Always second-guessing everything, every decision, every word I spoke. Maybe it was because of how I grew up, how I never felt like I quite measured up to anyone else. No one ever really told me that I was worth anything. So I guess I never learned to tell myself that either. Then she came into my life. Mia. She was beautiful, confident, everything I wasn't. She made me feel special in the beginning, like maybe there was something about me that was worth loving. We met at a mutual friend's party and she smiled at me. Just a quick look that lingered long enough to make my heart race. That's all it took. I was hooked. I told myself she was just being nice, but she kept coming around. She would talk to me, laugh at my awkward jokes, make me feel like I was more than just some background character in my own life. Slowly, I started believing in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I was enough for someone. But as time went on, that belief started to feel fragile, like a house of cards on the edge of the wind. Mia wasn't the type to stay tied down for long. I knew she had a lot of options, guys who were smarter, taller, more charming, more everything. I always thought it was just a matter of time, before she realized she could do better than me. But I didn't want to think like that. Not with her. I wanted to be the guy she could rely on, the guy who could make her smile. I tried to be what she needed. I started working on myself, tried to act more confident around her, less like the self-doubting mess I usually was. But deep down, I knew I was always walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one bad joke, one slip-up, and I'd fall. I guess that fear started to creep into my mind more than I realized. Maybe it was that fear that made me cling to her even harder, even though I felt the distance growing between us. She was pulling away bit by bit, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. There was a night, a cold night in the middle of winter. It was the kind of night where you could feel the chill in your bones, even if you were inside. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone when I saw the text. It was from my best friend Lucas. He asked if I was free to hang out. And honestly, I wasn't in the mood to go out, but I knew he needed someone to talk to. I said yes, not knowing that was the last decision I'd ever make with any clarity. Lucas showed up a little later, carrying a six-pack of beer and a grin that I couldn't quite read. We sat down in my living room, just like we always did. We talked about the usual, work, life, whatever. I didn't think anything was wrong, not until the conversation turned to Mia. It was casual at first. Lucas asked me how things were going with her, and I told him everything seemed fine, but I had this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. "Yeah, I get that," Lucas said, his voice oddly distant, like he wasn't really paying attention. You know, sometimes it's hard to really know if someone's into you or just pretending. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. It felt like a weird thing for him to say, but I pushed it aside. Lucas and I had been friends for years, so I trusted him. Maybe too much. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, thinking about what Lucas had said. What if Mia wasn't really into me? What if I was just fooling myself? The thoughts kept spiraling. I grabbed my phone again, checked Mia's social media. Nothing seemed off. But then I noticed something small. A comment she had left on one of Lucas's posts. It was innocent at first glance. Just a few words, a smiley face. But something about it felt different now, with the conversation from earlier still echoing in my head. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I tried to act normal when I saw Mia, but she was distant. She didn't look at me the way she used to. There was a coldness to her that I couldn't ignore. And then it happened. One evening after we had met up at the usual cafe, I noticed Lucas was acting strange. He was avoiding my gaze, shifting in his seat, and he kept fidgeting with his phone. I felt the weight of the silence between us. Then I saw it. The text message notification that lit up his phone screen. It was a picture of Mia. A selfie she had sent him. A photo of the two of them together. I froze, the knot in my stomach tightened. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. Lucas, my voice cracked and I could barely get the words out. What is this? He hesitated, his eyes flicking to mine. And for a moment I saw guilt flash across his face. I'm sorry, man, he muttered, looking away. I didn't mean for this to happen. What the hell, Lucas? I could barely speak through the rush of betrayal flooding my chest. How could you? We didn't mean for it to happen, he interrupted, his voice weak. But Mia and I, we've been seeing each other. She said she needed someone who understood her, someone who wouldn't hold her back. She didn't want to hurt you, but it just happened. The words felt like a punch to my gut. I wanted to scream, to yell at him, but I couldn't. The hurt was too deep. I wanted to ask why, but I already knew the answer. I had always known. Mia had never truly believed in me. She saw my weaknesses, my doubts, and she used them against me. She used me like a stepping stone, a way to pass the time until something better came along. And when she found that something better, when she found someone who wasn't crippled by the same insecurities, she left me behind without a second thought. I should have seen it coming. I should have trusted myself more, but I didn't. And now here I was, broken, betrayed by the people I trusted most. The hardest part? It wasn't losing Mia. It wasn't even losing Lucas. It was realizing that, deep down, I had allowed myself to believe that they were the ones who could make me whole, that I needed their approval to feel worthy. I thought they were the ones who could fix me, but the truth was that I had to fix myself first. I didn't speak to either of them for months after that. The pain was unbearable, and I needed space to figure out who I was without them. It wasn't easy, but slowly I began to rebuild myself. I started seeing a therapist, working on my self-esteem, and learning to believe in my own worth, without relying on others to validate it. It took time, and it wasn't perfect, but I learned that I didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. And as for Mia and Lucas, I saw them together once after everything. It didn't hurt anymore. It didn't even matter. I had learned that the most important relationship I could have was the one with myself. Maybe I wasn't the guy I had hoped to be, the guy who had it all together, but I was finally starting to become someone I could respect, and that I realized was enough. I was just 21 when I first met her. Her name was Emily, and she seemed like a spark of light in a dull world. We met in a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day where the world outside felt like a blur, but inside it was warm and filled with the rich scent of espresso. She had this calm aura, a serenity that I couldn't quite explain. I was drawn to her immediately. I had my share of small relationships in the past, but with Emily it felt different. I could feel the pull of something deeper, something I hadn't experienced before. She was everything I didn't know I was looking for. Her laughter was contagious. Her smile could light up the darkest of days, and her kindness seeped into every conversation, every glance. I found myself talking to her endlessly, about everything and nothing, and time seemed to slip away unnoticed. It wasn't long before I realized that I was falling for her. And when that realization hit me, I knew I had to do something about it. I couldn't let the moment pass. So one evening, as we sat in a quiet park watching the sunset, I told her how I felt. Emily, I can't stop thinking about you. You've become a part of me in ways I never expected. I want to be with you. I want to share my life with you, no matter what comes our way." She paused, her eyes searching mine as if weighing my words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I felt the same way, she said. "I've been hoping for something like this. But there's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea what was coming next, but whatever it was, I was ready for it. I told myself I can handle this, but the truth when it came was something I hadn't been prepared for. She told me about him, Daniel, a man from her past, someone she had loved deeply. She said that their relationship had ended before she met me, that it was over long ago, but the weight of that past still lingered in her heart. She spoke of him with a kind of bittersweet affection, and I could tell that even though she had moved on, there was something unshakable about her connection with him. My chest tightened as she continued. I felt a wave of jealousy rise, even though I knew I had no right to feel that way. After all, she was with me now. She had chosen me. But the past has a way of clawing its way into the present, doesn't it? She explained that it wasn't about love anymore. Not in the way it had once been, but the history between them was something that still held a place in her heart. And while she had made a promise to herself to move forward, there was a small part of her that hadn't fully let go. "I need you to know this," she said, her voice gentle yet firm, "because I want to be fair to you. I don't want you to think I'm still holding on to him in the way I once did." I listened, nodding, even as my mind raced. I wanted to be the man who could give her everything, the man who could make her forget the past and see only the future. We could have together, but deep down, a part of me wondered if I could really compete with the ghost of a man who had once been her everything. "I want to be here with you," I told her, my voice resolute. "I understand. I don't expect you to forget about him. I just need you to know that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. I'm yours, Emily." And in that moment, I meant it. I knew what I had to offer was real, and I would stand by her through whatever came next. My loyalty was unwavering. I had made a pledge, a promise that I would be the man she could count on, no matter the past she carried with her. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of her past began to manifest in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were moments when she would look out the window, her eyes distant, lost in thought. Sometimes I'd catch her silently scrolling through old messages on her phone, her face clouded with emotion. I couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking of him. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I found myself questioning if I was enough for her. Could I really be the man she needed if a part of her was still tethered to him? The love I had for her felt pure, but was it enough to fill the space that he still occupied in her heart? One night after a quiet dinner, I asked her about it. "Emily, are you really ready to move forward with me? Because I need to know if I'm enough, if I'm the one you want, not just someone to fill a gap." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of guilt in her expression. But then she took my hands in hers and her gaze softened. "I am ready," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm just trying to figure out how to completely let go. It's hard, Daniel. He was my first love, and that's not something you just erase. But you make me feel things I haven't felt in so long. You're not just filling a gap, you're creating something new. I need you to understand that." And just like that, I understood. Her past was a part of her, but it didn't have to define our future. She wasn't asking me to erase it. She was asking me to stand by her as she learned how to love me fully, without comparison, without hesitation. From that point on, I made my peace with it. I knew that my love for her had to be strong enough to weather the echoes of the past. It wasn't about forgetting, but about building something stronger than any shadow that lingered. I continued to pledge my loyalty to her, not as a way to compete with a past I couldn't change, but as a promise to be the best version of myself for her every day. We grew together in the months that followed, learning to navigate the complexities of love and commitment. Her past would always be a part of who she was, but with time, it became less of a burden and more of a memory, one that no longer held the power to shape our future. And as for me, I never wavered. I had pledged my loyalty to her, and no matter what happened, I would honor that promise. Because love, in its truest form, is not just about two people coming together without baggage. It's about learning to carry each other's burdens and still choosing to walk forward, hand in hand. It all started when I met her in the most unexpected way. I had just started my job at the advertising agency, and there she was, Sarah, a rising star in the design world. Her talent was undeniable, but there was something else about her that caught my attention. Her kindness, her laughter, the way she carried herself. I was drawn to her from the first moment we spoke. We became friends quickly. I admired her drive, her dedication to her work, but I saw something else too, the weight of her dreams and the pressure she was putting on herself. That's when I decided to step in and be there for her in whatever way I could. She was always talking about the next project, the next big pitch, the next step in her career. It was inspiring, but it also stressed her out. So I made it my mission to support her, to ease some of that burden. I'd surprise her with coffee during long nights at the office or help her brainstorm when she felt stuck. She appreciated it, I could tell, and I felt good, proud even. I knew I wasn't just a friend to her. I was someone she could count on. But as time passed, I realized something was changing. There was a new guy at the agency, Ryan. He was charismatic, confident, and seemed to be exactly what she needed professionally. They started collaborating more, and I couldn't help but notice the way she looked at him, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about him. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I tried to stay calm, to not let it show, but it was hard. I knew I had always been there for her, but Ryan was now there too in ways I couldn't be. He had a confidence with her that I couldn't replicate, and I was just me, a guy who'd always supported her, but never dared to ask for more. I tried not to let jealousy get the best of me. I still tried to support her as best as I could, attending her big presentations, offering advice when she asked. But the distance between us grew. I could see it in her eyes when she talked to me. She was torn, unsure of what was developing between us. I couldn't blame her. She had every right to explore her options. One evening, after one of her presentations, she came to me. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft. "I think I need to figure things out. I don't want to hurt you." That moment stung more than I expected. I felt like I had done everything right, everything I could. But maybe in the end I wasn't the one she needed. Maybe Ryan was. And maybe that was okay. I'd always be here for her, supporting her from the sidelines, even if it meant stepping back for a while. I never stopped caring for her. In fact, I think that's why I had to let her go, because she deserved to chase her dreams, without me holding her back. And as hard as it was, I wanted to see her happy, even if it wasn't with me. I was 18 when I met her. Her name was Emily, and she had this way about her, this energy that radiated like sunlight. She had a laugh that could fill a room, and when she smiled, it was like everything else faded away. It didn't take long before I realized that I was completely in love with her. No, scratch that, I was obsessed with her. Every little thing she did, every word she spoke, seemed to wrap itself around my heart and my mind in ways I didn't understand. I didn't just like her. I worshipped her. I thought I was the luckiest guy on earth to have her in my life. For the first few months, it felt like a dream. We'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing. Her favorite songs, books, her dreams and fears. I told her things I had never told anyone before, and she listened like no one else did. It felt like we were connected, like we were meant to be. I was the happiest I'd ever been. But as with all things, time passed and the cracks in the dream began to show. I started noticing things, small things at first, but they piled up. She'd get texts at strange hours of the night, and when I asked her about them, she'd brush it off with a laugh and tell me it was nothing. Her tone would change whenever certain names came up in conversation. At first, I told myself I was just being paranoid, overthinking things. After all, I had her, right? She loved me, I was sure of it. Or so I thought. One night after an argument that had left me restless, I decided to go through her phone. I didn't want to. I knew it was wrong, but my mind had been spinning with doubt for days, and I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. So I did it. I went through her messages. The moment I saw it, my heart sank. There it was, a conversation that chilled me to the bone. It was between Emily and someone named Jason. At first, I didn't recognize the name, but as I scrolled further, I found myself reading a conversation from just a few months before we met. I couldn't believe what I was reading. They'd been seeing each other, not just casually either. They were in love, or at least that's what the messages suggested. There were intimate words exchanged, jokes about their future together and promises of meeting up. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach churn, was when I saw the messages that were sent after she and I had started dating. She'd been cheating on me, It was subtle at first, but then it became clear. She was still in contact with him, still seeing him behind my back. I felt my world crumble in an instant. How could she? How could she betray me like this? The girl I loved more than anything, the one I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, had been lying to me from the start. I remember sitting there, numb as I kept reading. I couldn't stop myself. Each message cut deeper and deeper into me. I didn't know how long I'd been sitting there when she finally came home. I knew she had no idea what I had found. She walked into the living room with her usual bright smile, but as soon as she saw me, her face changed. There was a flicker of panic in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but a little too cautious. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up, holding up her phone. The look on her face told me everything before she even said a word. She tried to hide the panic, but it was too late. I can explain," she said, but I cut her off. "Explain? How do you explain this?" My voice shook, and I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. "You were cheating on me, Emily, behind my back. After we started dating. How long were you lying to me?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She just stood there looking at me like she was about to break. I wanted to scream, to rage at her, but instead, I felt this horrible sense of emptiness. How could she do this to me? "I never meant for it to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was before we were together, and I didn't know how to let him go when I met you." "How could you even say that?" I spat. "You were still seeing him after we started. You didn't think I deserved the truth? You didn't think I deserved your honesty?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she took a step toward me, but I took a step back. I couldn't look at her. "Not now, not after everything." "I'm so sorry," she said, but the words felt hollow, like they were being thrown at me to make it all go away. "I don't want your apology," I said, my voice cold. "I don't know who you are anymore." I walked out of the room then, pacing the apartment like a caged animal. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, hurt, anger, confusion. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to understand. But the other part of me, the part that had trusted her completely, felt shattered. How could I ever look at her the same way again? How could I ever believe in her again? I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours going over everything in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have been so blind? She had been the center of my world, and now I felt like I was drowning in my own heartbreak. The next morning, she tried to talk to me. She came to me, tears in her eyes, but I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking. I told her I needed space. I told her I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. And as she stood there, her eyes pleading for me to understand, I knew deep down that I couldn't go back to how things were. The trust had been broken beyond repair. The love I thought was unconditional had turned into a haunting memory. In the days that followed, I tried to move on. I tried to focus on other things, on myself, on my friends, on rebuilding what had been broken. But it wasn't easy. The memories of her still lingered like a shadow, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. And I remembered how deeply I had loved her. But with that love, I also remembered the betrayal. And in that pain, I found a new kind of strength. I don't think I'll ever forget her. She was my first love, the one who made me believe in the idea of love at first sight. But I also learned that sometimes love isn't enough. Trust is what holds everything together. And once that's shattered, nothing will ever be the same. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I do know this: I'll never make the same mistake again. I'll never give my heart to someone who doesn't deserve it. And I'll always remember the lesson Emily taught me, the painful lesson of love and betrayal. It was supposed to be just another trip, long, boring, and uneventful. I had booked the train tickets months ago, a solo trip to clear my head. Life had been a little too hectic lately, and I needed the space to breathe. I packed my bag, grabbed my headphones, and set off without much thought. I had no idea that everything was about to change on that train ride. The train was packed, which wasn't surprising. The only seat left was next to this girl who seemed just as lost in her world as I was. I couldn't tell you exactly why, but I was drawn to her. Maybe it was the way she smiled at the ticket collector, or how she adjusted her glasses every few minutes. There was something simple about her, something real. I hesitated, but then with a small shrug, I sat down beside her. We both exchanged polite but distant glances, the kind that people share when they're not sure if they want to talk to a stranger. The train started moving and I plugged my headphones in, thinking that would be the end of it. But then I noticed something. She had a book with her. A thick one of those worn-out paperbacks you can tell has been loved and read over and over again. It wasn't just any book, though. As I glanced down, I realized it was one I had read a few months earlier, one of my favorite novels. I hadn't met many people who had even heard of it, let alone read it. I couldn't resist. "Hey," I said, cautiously pulling out my headphones. "You're reading The Traveler's Path?" "That's one of my favorites." She looked up, blinking at me in surprise. Her eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, met mine. For a second, I thought she might brush me off, but then she smiled. "Really? I didn't think many people knew about it." "It's such a unique book, don't you think?" My heart skipped a beat. "Yeah, exactly. The way it blends adventure with philosophy, it's like you can travel with the character. You know?" She nodded, and for the first time I felt like we were in the same world. I know, I've always loved stories like that. Ones where you don't just follow the character's journey, but you learn something along the way. It's like, I don't know, finding yourself through someone else's eyes. I couldn't stop smiling. It was rare to meet someone who understood exactly what I was talking about. The conversation just seemed to flow after that. We talked about our favorite books, authors, and the places we dreamed of visiting. We both had this wild ambition to travel the world. Not as tourists, but as explorers, searching for new experiences. It felt like we were kindred spirits even though we'd only just met. After a while, I realized that we had more than just books in common. We both loved photography. I had always enjoyed capturing moments, whether it was the sunset or just the ordinary people on the street. She pulled out her camera and showed me some of her shots, and I couldn't believe how talented she was. Her photos were raw, capturing the emotions of the people she'd met along her travels. I showed her some of mine, and we spent the next hour sharing tips and stories of our favorite shots. It was like we were in a secret world, just the two of us, surrounded by nothing but the sound of the train's wheels on the track. When we finally arrived at the next station, I didn't want the conversation to end. We stood by the doors and I awkwardly shuffled my feet, unsure of what to do next. The train was stopping, but neither of us seemed in a rush to leave. "Are you getting off here?" I asked, my voice a little hesitant. She shook her head. "No, I'm headed further. But I've really enjoyed this. It's not every day you meet someone who actually gets you." I couldn't help but smile. "Same here." It feels like we've known each other much longer than just a few hours. We exchanged numbers, and as the doors opened, I had this strange feeling of not wanting to say goodbye. I didn't want the connection to fizzle out, but we both knew that sometimes the best things in life don't happen right away. They take time to grow. The next few days were a whirlwind. We kept texting, sending each other photos of our travels, recommending books to read, and sharing memories of places we'd been. Our conversations always felt effortless, like we were picking up right where we left off. I started to realize something. This wasn't just a friendship. There was something more. A week later, we decided to meet up again. This time, I suggested a cozy little cafe I knew, where they served the best hot chocolate in town. When she walked in, I could hardly contain the smile that spread across my face. She looked just as beautiful as I remembered, and I felt this rush of excitement, like I was seeing her for the first time all over again. We talked for hours. It was one of those conversations where time seemed to stop. We covered everything, our hopes, our dreams, our fears. She talked about how she had always wanted to visit Japan, and I shared my dream of hiking the Appalachian Trail. But no matter where we wanted to go or what we wanted to do, we both realized we wanted to experience it together. And I think that's when I realized that I wasn't just falling for her in the way I had fallen for books or photography. I was falling for her, the person. Every time we talked, every moment we shared, I felt closer to her. It wasn't just about having the same hobbies. It was about the way we saw the world, the way she could make an ordinary moment feel magical just by being there, and the way I felt like I could be myself around her. No pretenses, no expectations. Weeks passed and we spent more time together. We explored new places, took countless photos, and continued to talk about our dreams. I never wanted that feeling to end, but I knew deep down that we were building something special. One evening, while we were sitting on a park bench watching the sunset, she turned to me with that same warm smile. "I'm glad we met," she said softly. I didn't expect this trip to change my life, but it did. I nodded, feeling the same way. Yeah, me too. I think this might be the start of something incredible. And that was it. No grand declaration, no sweeping gesture. Just the simple truth that we had found something real, something worth holding on to. I never would have guessed that a random encounter on a train would lead to something so life-changing. But sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. And for me, meeting her on that long, ordinary trip was the beginning of a love story that felt as deep and endless as the journeys we dreamed of taking together. I remember the day we first met online like it was yesterday. It wasn't a grand moment, no fireworks or anything cinematic. Just a simple message in a random group chat and a few exchanged words that somehow felt different. It was on a late Thursday evening. I had been scrolling aimlessly through my phone, bored and waiting for the night to pass, when I saw her comment on a post. Something about the way she phrased it caught my attention, and I couldn't help but reply. She didn't seem like someone trying too hard to be noticed. It was just a casual exchange. One of those conversations you think will fade away after a few messages. But somehow it didn't. Something in the way we talked felt easy. Like we had known each other for years. Her name was Emily. She was from another city. A place I had never been to, but in that moment, the distance between us felt like nothing. The first few conversations were simple, talking about work, what we liked to do on weekends, what our favorite movies were. But as the days went on, I realized we were sharing more than just surface-level details. It felt like she was the person I had been looking for without even knowing it. We started texting more, staying up late into the night, not wanting to say goodbye. It didn't matter that we were miles apart. There was something magnetic about her. Her sense of humor, her kindness, the way she saw the world, it was all so captivating. I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than anything else. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt such a deep, emotional connection with someone. It wasn't like those fleeting crushes I'd had in the past. This felt different. We could talk for hours about anything, our childhood memories, our dreams, our fears. There was never any judgment, just understanding. I could be myself completely with her, and she did the same with me. It took me a while to admit to myself that I was falling for her. I mean, how could I? She was in another city and I was here. What did I even know about her world outside of our chats? It didn't make sense. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see her smile, hear her laugh, feel her warmth. And that was when I realized distance couldn't stop this feeling. If anything, it made me want her more. I wanted to know everything about her, to be there with her, to build something real, even if it was impossible. So I decided to take a chance. One evening, after weeks of talking, I asked her, "Do you think we could make this work? Even with the distance between us?" There was a pause. For a moment, I thought I might have overstepped, that maybe she would say something that would make me regret bringing it up. But then her reply came through. "I was hoping you'd say that." It turned out she felt the same way. She had been thinking about the same thing. Emily didn't want to let go of what we had either. That was the moment I knew we weren't just playing around anymore. This was something real. The weeks that followed were full of conversations about how we could make this work. It wasn't just about the late-night calls or sweet messages anymore. We talked about our future, about how we could actually close the gap between us, both literally and figuratively. It wasn't easy. We had to plan everything carefully. We each had our own lives in our cities, our responsibilities, but we were both committed to making it happen. Eventually, I made the decision to visit her. I'll never forget the day I booked my flight. The thought of finally meeting her face-to-face felt surreal. We had shared so much already, so many laughs, tears, dreams, but to be in the same place, breathing the same air, it felt like it could be both overwhelming and perfect. When I arrived in her city, I was nervous. Nervous that what we had online might not translate into real life, that maybe we wouldn't be the same when we met. But as soon as I saw her waiting for me at the airport, all my fears melted away. She was just as beautiful, just as kind, just as real as I had imagined. She looked at me with those bright eyes and everything just clicked. We hugged like we had known each other forever, and I swear, that moment felt like the beginning of something monumental. We spent the weekend together, talking, laughing, exploring her city. It was like every moment with her was a memory in the making, and by the end of the trip, I didn't want to leave. The thought of being apart again felt unbearable. but we had already talked about the next step. We knew that the only way to make this work was to take a leap, a big one. A few weeks after I returned home, I asked her a question I never thought I'd ask so soon. But after everything we had been through, after how real it all felt, it just felt right. "Emily, will you marry me?" I remember her eyes getting teary as she smiled and said yes. I don't think there was ever a moment in my life where I felt more sure of something. Marriage was always something I thought of in the distant future. But when you find someone who makes your heart feel at home, even when you're worlds apart, time seems irrelevant. We both knew that love wasn't just about proximity. It was about trust, about believing in each other even when the world told you it wasn't practical. We weren't letting distance dictate our happiness. We were going to build a life together no matter where we were, and so we did. After some time, we made the decision to move in together. I relocated to her city and we started our new life. There were challenges, of course. Learning to live in the same space, adjusting to new routines, balancing work and personal time, but none of it mattered. We were together. I think back on that first message we exchanged, the simple words that led to everything. It blows my mind how two people, separated by miles and miles, can come together in such an incredible way. Love doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always follow a neat, easy path, but it's real. And it's worth taking a leap for. Now, as I sit here with her by my side, planning our future together, I can't help but smile at how far we've come. From two strangers in different cities to partners in life, every moment with her feels like a dream come true. A dream that once upon a time I didn't even know was possible. It all started one rainy afternoon, one of those soft, quiet days when everything feels suspended in time. I was at the library, just like I had been countless times before. You could always find me there, buried in books, trying to make sense of things I couldn't quite understand, or just escaping into worlds far removed from the real one. It was the perfect place for a quiet mind to gather thoughts and contemplate. That day, the library was particularly still. The only sounds were the occasional shuffle of pages and the low murmur of distant conversations. But I wasn't focused on anything outside my book. It was a text for a class I barely cared about, but I was doing my best to absorb its contents. That's when I noticed her. She was seated across the room from me, tucked in the corner by the big window where the rain gently tapped against the glass. She had a book open in front of her, but her gaze wasn't really on the pages. Instead, she seemed lost in thought, the way someone does when they're caught between worlds, the one in the book and the one around them. I noticed how her fingers softly traced the edge of the page, like she was searching for something more than just the words. At first, I wasn't sure why she caught my attention. Maybe it was the quiet grace with which she sat there absorbed in her world. Or maybe it was the way the soft light from the window framed her face, giving her an almost ethereal quality. Either way, I found myself drawn to her. I kept looking, not knowing that I was staring a bit too long, but she didn't seem to mind. Eventually, she caught my eye. She didn't look away immediately, like most people would when caught in such a moment. Instead, she smiled. Just a small, subtle smile, as if she had already known I was watching her. It was a smile that invited conversation without saying a word. And before I could think of anything else to do, I found myself standing up and walking over to her. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. She looked up from her book and smiled again, a little wider this time. "Of course, go ahead." I sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't used to talking to strangers, especially in such a quiet place. But the calmness of the moment felt natural. She didn't seem to mind the silence. After a while, she spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "What are you reading?" I glanced down at the textbook I had been holding, still open to some dense, boring page. Just some required reading for class," I said, barely glancing at it again. "Nothing exciting." She chuckled lightly. "I know the feeling. I'm just reading for fun. I like to escape into books. The real world is too noisy sometimes, don't you think?" I smiled at her words. It was strange how easily she spoke, how effortlessly she revealed something about herself without hesitation. "Yeah, I get that," I said. "Books can be a good escape." That was how it started. We talked a little more about books, then about classes, and then somehow the conversation shifted to life in general. The rain outside intensified, but we didn't notice. Time seemed to stop in that small corner of the library, What started as a casual chat grew into something deeper, something more comfortable, more intimate. We exchanged stories, thoughts, and dreams. I learned that her name was Emma, and she was studying literature, just like I was, though with a passion I lacked. I learned that she loved the quiet, but also craved adventure, and that her idea of a perfect day involved sitting by the ocean, lost in her thoughts with the sound of the waves as her soundtrack. We had so much in common, but there was still so much I didn't know. Yet as I listened to her talk, I felt a connection, something I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't love at first sight, not in the traditional sense, but as the hours passed, I realized that I had found something rare in that library. Someone who made the world feel different. Someone who could share the same silence and make it meaningful. Days turned into weeks and we kept meeting at the library. It became our place, a quiet refuge where we would meet, sometimes for hours and sometimes only for a few moments, but it was always enough. We talked about books, about life, about things that didn't make sense, and things that were too complex to put into words. There was a calmness in our connection, a tranquility that I had never known before. It was like we had both found a rhythm, a pace that allowed us to be ourselves without any pressure. One afternoon, as we sat by the same window, the rain having slowed to a drizzle, I realized that I had fallen in love with her. It wasn't some grand gesture or dramatic moment. It wasn't a sudden rush of emotion. It was a steady, quiet feeling, like the way the rain gradually softens the earth. She had become a part of my world, and the thought of her brought warmth to the quietest moments of my day. I never told her how I felt, not immediately. The words never seemed enough, but I think in her own way Emma knew. We didn't need declarations or fireworks. There was something real between us, something deep and true. Eventually, the day came when she asked me, as casually as ever, "Do you want to get coffee after this?" I smiled at the simplicity of it. I'd love to, and that's how it all began. Two people meeting in a quiet library, surrounded by books, and finding something much more important. The kind of love that doesn't shout or demand attention, but simply exists, gently growing in the space between words. We didn't need anything else, not when we had each other. It started as something simple, a project, an assignment that came out of nowhere. She was new to the company, and I had no idea how much her presence would change my life. It was the first time I had seen her when they introduced her in the meeting room. Anna, her name was Anna. I remember the way she smiled. Shy at first, but it was warm, inviting, like a quiet promise that everything would be okay. She didn't seem like the kind of person who would stand out in a crowd, but when she walked into the room, it was impossible not to notice her. Our manager paired us together for a big project. It was going to take weeks, lots of late nights, brainstorming sessions and reports. I don't think he realized how much time we'd actually spend together. At first, it felt like work, like any other task. I was used to working with colleagues, getting the job done without much thought. But with Anna, it was different. I remember the first time we sat down to go over the project. She was sitting across from me, her hair neatly tucked behind her ears, her glasses glinting in the soft office light. Her eyes were always focused, like she was deeply engaged in whatever we were doing. But I couldn't help noticing the way she would glance up at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Maybe I was imagining it, but I thought I saw a kind of curiosity there. "Do you think we should tweak this part of the proposal?" she asked, pointing at the screen. Her voice was soft but clear, and I found myself leaning forward, eager to hear her ideas. "Yeah, definitely," I said, not sure whether I was agreeing with her idea or just getting lost in the way she spoke. "You've got a good point. It could make the client feel more confident about our approach." I had always been a bit reserved, not shy, but not the type to dive into deep conversations right away. Yet with Anna, there was something different. The small talk wasn't just small. Every word felt meaningful. As the days went by, our interactions became more natural. We began to share lunch breaks, talking about everything from the projects we worked on to our weekend plans. We'd laugh about the absurdity of some of the ideas we had to present, and I found myself looking forward to our next meeting. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt like there was something there, something I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, we were sitting in the break room, going over the latest feedback from our client. It was a quiet moment, with everyone else in the office absorbed in their own work. Anna and I were alone, and for the first time, I noticed the way her eyes lingered on me just a bit longer than usual. "You ever think about how much we've grown since we started this project?" she asked, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I looked at her, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, her gaze thoughtful, "when we first started, we barely knew each other. Now we've spent all this time together. We've built something, not just the project, but, I don't know, a kind of connection. It hit me then." She felt it too. This bond between us that had grown over the weeks. It wasn't just work anymore. It wasn't just about the deadlines or the proposals. I had begun to care about her, not just as a colleague, but as something more. I took a deep breath, feeling a nervous flutter in my chest. "Yeah, I guess I have thought about that." My voice came out a little softer than I had intended. "I didn't expect it, but I feel like we've become a pretty good team." She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I think so too." From that moment, things began to change between us. We would meet outside of work sometimes, grabbing a coffee after office hours or taking a walk through the park nearby. The conversations were still easy, but now they carried a different weight. We'd share things about our lives, our hopes, our dreams, our fears. I learned that she loved art, that she had a passion for photography, and that she dreamed of one day traveling the world. She learned that I had a tendency to overthink everything, that I had a secret love for old books, and that I was terrified of failure. One evening we stayed late at the office, working on the final draft of the project. The office had emptied out and it was just the two of us. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the desks. I glanced over at Anna and she was typing away, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey Anna," I said, my voice quieter than usual. I wanted to tell you something." She stopped typing and looked up at me, her expression curious. "What's up?" I felt nervous flutter in my stomach again, but this time it was different. I wasn't sure why, but I felt like I had to say it. I think I've been falling for you. I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did, slowly over time, and now I can't stop thinking about you." There was a silence. I half wondered if I'd just ruined everything. But then she smiled softly, her eyes warm. "I've been feeling the same way," she said, her voice almost a whisper. The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming. I couldn't believe it. All this time I'd been so caught up in my feelings, wondering if she felt the same way, and now here she was, confirming everything I'd been hoping for. From that night on, things shifted even more. We weren't just colleagues working together on a project. We were partners, both in work and in life. We still had the project to finish, of course, and there were deadlines to meet. But now everything felt a little easier, a little more exciting. The late-night meetings turned into late-night conversations. Our connection had transformed into something much deeper than I could have imagined when we first started working together. The project itself was a success. We presented it to the client, and they were thrilled with the results. Our manager was proud of our work, and we both received recognition for the effort we put in. But for me, the real success wasn't the accolades or the praise. It was the journey we had taken together, the way we had grown as individuals and as a team, the way I had come to realize that what I felt for Anna was no longer just about the project. It was about her, the person she was, and how much she meant to me. Now, as I look back on it all, I can't help but smile. It was a love story that started out simple, born out of a shared project, but it grew into something so much more. It became a partnership, a deep connection that neither of us could have predicted. And every day since, I've felt lucky to have had that project with her. Not just because of the work we accomplished, but because it led me to her. And I think in the end, that was the most important thing I learned. Sometimes, love doesn't come in a grand, dramatic moment. Sometimes it's just the slow, quiet moments that turn into something unforgettable. And now, as I walk through life with her, I know that no matter where our careers take us, or what happens next, we'll always be a team. I guess it all started when we were too young to really understand what love was. When I first met Emily, she was this bright, ambitious girl full of energy and dreams. I was drawn to her instantly, and at the time everything felt so real. We were so sure we had found the one, but looking back, we were both just figuring out who we were. We were two kids pretending to know what life was about. We got married young, probably too young. Things were good at first, but we soon realized we were just different people, still growing, still learning. There was no huge dramatic fight or scandal, We just kind of drifted apart. The love wasn't enough to hold us together, so we separated. It felt like a failure at the time, but now I see it differently. We were both too immature, and we needed space to figure ourselves out. Years passed. I moved on, but there was always this part of me that couldn't completely let go of her. Emily was a part of who I was, and no matter what happened in my life, that never changed. I dated other people, but they were never her. She was the one I compared everyone to, even if I didn't realize it. And then one day I bumped into her randomly like a twist of fate. It was in a coffee shop, the kind of place where you can sit quietly in the corner without anyone noticing you. I walked in, and there she was, sitting at a table by the window reading a book. She hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment I almost turned around and walked out. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her, but something in me urged me to stay. Maybe it was the years of wondering how she was doing, or the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. I sat down and she looked up, surprised. Her eyes were the same, but they were more seasoned, like she had lived more, experienced more. Her smile wasn't as carefree as before, but there was something deeper in it now, something real. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, and maybe I was. I know I was. We talked for hours. The conversation flowed naturally, like no time had passed, even though so much had. She told me about her life, her work, her travels. I told her about mine. But what surprised me most was how easily we fell into rhythm again. It was like the distance between us had made space for something more mature, something grounded in who we really were, not who we had thought we were. I think we both realized in that moment that we had changed. We were still us, but we had grown up. The mistakes, the hurts, all the things we had fought about, they didn't seem so important anymore. Instead, we saw each other as two people who had lived through their own journeys. And maybe we could start a new one together, this time, with the wisdom that only comes with age. We didn't rush into anything. There was no dramatic declaration of love or promises for the future. We took it slow. But as the days went by, we kept meeting, talking, laughing. Our feelings matured, I guess, into something stronger, something more stable. And now, after all these years, I realized that maybe we needed that time apart to really know what we meant to each other. What we have now is different, deeper, more respectful. It's not the kind of love we had before, when everything was new and intense. It's the kind of love that's built on understanding, patience, and knowing that we're not perfect, but we're perfect for each other. Maybe this is the real beginning of our story. Maybe we needed to grow up before we could really be together. But whatever happens, I know one thing for sure. I'm not letting her go again. It all started on an ordinary day, one that seemed no different from the rest. I had just moved to the city, fresh out of college, and was trying to settle into my new life. I remember walking through the park, headphones in, lost in my thoughts, when I saw her. She was sitting on a bench reading a book. Her hair, dark and wavy, framed her face perfectly. She looked peaceful, lost in the world of her story, completely unaware of everything around her. But when the breeze caught her hair and she looked up, our eyes met. In that instant, everything else blurred. I couldn't look away. It felt like time had stopped. I'd never seen anyone quite like her before. I had to talk to her. But what would I even say? My heart was pounding, my hands were clammy. I had never been the kind of guy to just walk up to a stranger and start a conversation, but something about her made it feel like I had to. So I just did it. I sat down next to her, and I said the first thing that came to my mind. "Is that a good book?" She smiled, and that smile, it was everything. It was warm, genuine, like the sun breaking through the clouds. And from that moment on, everything changed. We talked for hours, and it felt so easy, so natural. I found out her name was Mia, and she was new to the city too, trying to figure out where she belonged. It was like we were two pieces of a puzzle, both just trying to find our place in the world, and somehow we had found each other. As the days turned into weeks, we spent more time together. I took her to my favorite coffee shop. We went on walks, we laughed. We shared stories about our childhoods, our hopes, our dreams. There was this connection that was undeniable, something deep and real. With her, I didn't have to pretend. I could just be myself, and that felt like the most amazing thing in the world. But as much as we were getting close, there was a part of me that was scared. What if it wasn't real? What if this was just a fleeting feeling? Something that would fade over time. But when I saw the way she looked at me, When I felt her hand in mine, I knew I couldn't let go. I wasn't going to let this be some short-lived thing. She was too important to me. One evening under the stars, I took a deep breath and told her how I felt. I told her that I couldn't imagine my life without her, that I wanted her by my side forever. She looked at me, and I could see the same love and uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't sure either, but we both knew it was worth taking the leap together. A few years passed. We faced challenges just like any couple. There were times when we disagreed, when we didn't know what the future would hold. But every time we worked through it together, we grew stronger, more in love, more certain that we were meant to be. And then on a cold winter's day, I took her to the place where it all started, our park. I had a ring in my pocket, and as we sat on the same bench where we first met, I asked her the question I had been dying to ask. Will you marry me? She didn't hesitate for a second. She said yes, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. Now, years later, as I'm standing beside her, looking into her eyes on our wedding day, I still feel that same flutter in my chest. I can't believe how far we've come, how much we've shared, how much we've built together. Our love story is my favorite story, and it's just beginning.